Okay, we are recording. Today we are going to finish up our exercises from chapter 5. So we were able to do exercises 1, 3, and 4 from chapter 5. And today we're going to try to finish up the rest of them. So let me come down here real quick. Okay, so yeah, we just did this one with the number of teams. And now, which one's your assignment? I keep on forgetting. So your assignment is number 6. So today we're going to do program 5, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, we'll just go through them. So number 5, write a defining table and a JavaScript program to compute the mileage of a vehicle.
That's actually one of the assignments.
Okay. Okay, so that's our assignment. All right, so let's do number 6. When you exercise to strengthen your heart, you should maintain your heart rate within a range. To find that range, subtract your age from 220. This difference is your maximum heart rate per minute. Your heart rate or your heart simply will not beat faster than this maximum 220 minus age. When exercising to strengthen your heart, you should keep your heart rate between 65 and 85% of your heart's max. Write a defining table in a JavaScript program that asks a person's age and computes and outputs the lowest or the slowest and fastest rates necessary to strengthen his heart. All right, well, this should be fun. Okay, let me split this up. I'm going to make a new file in here, and we're going to call this class exercise, 6.html. All right, and then in here, we're just going to start this from scratch. We have a template, but we'll go ahead and start this from scratch. All right, let's start with a script tag and a defining table. Okay, so we have our input, processing, output. We know our output, looking at this, outputs the slowest and fastest rates. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to copy this, the slowest and fastest rates. I'll copy this whole thing. So that's our output. Processing, well, let's start with our input. So let's see. That asks for a person's age. Okay, so all we need is person's age. Okay, all right, and then processing, we got a couple of things to do here. So the max rate, so we'll just give a spot for max and min. So the max, it looks like it's 220 minus age, right? And then but then here it says it should be 65 to 85% of your heart's maximum. So that is the max. But this fastest rate right here is going to be 85% of that. Okay. So we're going to put this into parentheses because we're going to say times 0.85, which will give us 85% of that. And I put this into parentheses just to let us know that we have to do the subtraction first, and then we'll multiply that by the percentage. And then the min will be this exact same thing, except times 0.65.
65. Yeah.
That'll give us our 65%. Okay, any questions up to this point?
No questions.
Okay. So let's head over to the body real quick. Let's put in an input. We'll give this an ID of age. And we'll say, please enter your age. And then let's have a button. And this button will have an on-click attribute to call a function called calculate healthy heart rate zone. All right, that's a nice big name. Okay, and then up here, well, we need a div first too. Let's go ahead and do a div. And we'll have an ID of outputs. Okay. Any objections to our HTML here? Sweet, I think we should be good. So let's make our function calculate healthy heart rate zone. And then we need to retrieve this input. So I'm going to say var age equals document dot get element by ID age dot value. And then like we saw yesterday, we need to parse this. So let's change this string into a number by saying parse float. And then we'll have a nice age number. Okay, so that was our input. I'll just put a comment there for that. And then we'll have our processing and our output. Our output is just going to be document dot get element by ID output dot inner.html, thank you, VS Code, equals, and let's call this just message. All right, so we're going to have to output two variables here. And so I'm thinking we'll just make a string to say your max heart rate should be this and your min heart rate should be this. And we can build that string here. So let's start by saying var max and var min. And then we'll do the math for these. So I'm just going to copy this. And then I'll copy this. Okay, and that should give us our max and min. And then we just have to declare this guy. We good up to this point?
Yep.
Okay. So var message equals, we can just say your max heart rate is plus max. And then let's have a period. And then your min heart rate is plus min. Okay, so if I blow this up so we can see it better, here's our whole program. We haven't ran it yet, but it's looking pretty good. Okay, so in the body, we have an input with an ID of age, which we are retrieving and parsing right here and assigning to our variable age. And then we have a button to call our function, calculate healthy heart rate zone. And then we have a div called output, which we're going to output our message to. Our processing gets 85% of the max heart rate and 65% of the max heart rate to give us our max and min healthy range, the slowest and fastest rates necessary to strengthen his heart. And then we added that into a string. Say your max heart rate is max, period. Your min heart rate is min, period. Go ahead and run it. So copy path, go over to my browser, new tab, paste. We forgot some text in our button. So right here, we'll just say calculate. That'll look a little bit nicer. I'm going to open up my developer tools. I want these open always, so that while I'm working on this, if there are any errors, I can see them. So we'll put our age in here. I'll say 28. Calculate. It says your max heart rate is 163.2. Your min heart rate is 124.8. Plus 10 zeros and a 1. Okay, I don't really like that. The assignment doesn't say that we have to clean that up, but I think we should clean that up. Okay, so a really easy way to clean this up. Usually when we're talking about heart rates, we don't say, oh, you should hit 140.6. Usually we don't use decimals with heart rates. So I'm thinking we could just round this. So right here, this math gave us 163.2. And this math gave us roughly 124.8. But if we just say math.round and put this whole thing into parentheses, then it will round everything in here, which is currently those numbers that we just saw. And so we can put that on both of these lines, hit save, and then it'll automatically round these to whole numbers. So if we hit refresh, type in 28, now it's max heart is 163 and your min is 125. Okay. Any questions or anything else you guys wanted to do or see?
It is so easy when you do it, but I'm sure that when I do it, I'll just be lost.
Yeah, it definitely takes practice. It really
Great job.
All right, number 7. Write a defining table in a JavaScript program to compute and output an employee's after-tax pay. Your program will read from the keyboard the number of regular hours that an employee worked. Did we already do this one? maybe, we didn't do this one. Okay. And then compute that employee's after-tax pay. Tax is 15% of the employee's gross pay. Your program should correctly handle real numbers, which means we have to use parse float. Anytime you see that, we have to use parse float so that we can do decimals. Okay, let's get started here. I'm going to make a new file, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is class exercise 7.html, exclamation mark tab. And I can close this. I don't need it for a while. First things first, let's do our defining table. So I'm going to make a script tag with a nice multi-line comment here. I'll have an input, output, and processing. Okay, our output is what? What's our output?
The employers after tax pay.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay. We have the output there, employees after tax pay. What's our input? The keyword. Okay, number of regular hours, and then employee's wage. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. So we have two inputs. I'll just take that and out and just hit enter. So number of regular hours, I'll just say worked. Number of regular hours worked, and then that employee's wage, and then employees after tax pay. So our processing, so let's think about this. We're going to have to do hours times wage, right? And then after that, I think we just take off 15%. Does that sound right?
What's that?
Okay, does that sound right? Just doing hours times wage and then taking off 15%?
Yeah, we should try that.
Great. So let me just pull up a calculator. I want to test this real quick. So if I have $100 and I want to take off 15%, if I say divided by 15, that doesn't work. So if I say 115 times, I always do like 0.85. Whoops. So about $100 times 0.85, then it takes off that 15%. But I'm pretty sure there's a way to do it with division, but that's okay. Oh, maybe it's 100 divided by 1.15. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, we'll keep to my multiplication. So we'll say pay times 0.85, and that'll take off that 15%. All righty, so let's get started in here. We need two inputs. So we'll say, please enter your hours, input, and ID equals hours. And then we'll say, please, hotkeys that I just pressed, Control C to copy an entire line of code, and Control V to paste an entire line of code. Please enter your hourly wage. And then here we'll just put wage. Okay, so there's our inputs. And then we need a button to press. We'll just call this calculate again. We need an on-click attribute to call a function. And we'll just say calculate wage or pay, calculate pay. And then we need a div with an ID, which I'm used to calling output because that's what we're using these divs for. Okay, so let me get my Outlook. It's been a pleasure. All right, so our HTML should be good to go. Let's come up into here and let's make a function called calculate pay. Okay, we have input, processing, and output that we need. Okay, so if I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I don't remember how I'm supposed to get my inputs. You know, the comment was made a second ago that it's really easy watching me do this, but it's harder when you're trying to like figure out a program by yourself. So if you can figure out this defining table, okay, that's like half the battle. Looking at this, I know I need two inputs. Every time I have an input, they'll have to have a unique ID. Okay, I know what I have to output. So I need an output div, which I can just use this exact same thing every single time. And when I go and take my test, I can look at these programs that I've already written, and I can use them as much as I want. Then all I have to worry about is just my calculation here. And so right here, when I see my inputs, I could look at a previous program and be like, oh, here's how I did my input. I used document.getElementById, whatever the ID was on the input in the body. I used .value. I also parsed it. And so I could effectively just copy this line of code from one of the programs that I've already written when I go to take my test. So right here, I'm just going to say var hours equals document.getElementById hours.value. We know we need to parse it into a real number. Anytime we're working with numbers, we're always going to put parse float here. Always. Okay, there's one of our inputs. Control C, Control V. I'm going to copy this line of code, and I'm going to say wage and wage. Okay, so now I'll get data from the hours input down here, and I'll get data from the wage input down here. And that should be it for our input. Output, again, I could look at a previous program that I've written and basically just copy this and paste it. Okay, document.getElementById output.html equals, and maybe I'll have a variable called pay this time instead of message. And the last thing I have to do is just this guy right here. Just make that pay. So I'm going to say var pay equals hours times wage times 0.85. Because of order of operations, all of this is multiplication, and so I can just throw it all out here, and it'll work just fine. But we could check this first. Let me take off this times 0.85 first, and let's just see if our program is working up to this point. So I'm going to come over here. Put my file over here. Please enter your hours. I'll say 10 hours, and I'm making $5 an hour. So if this works, we should see a 50 pop up on the page. And there it is. Okay, so that worked. Now I'm going to come back over here, undo, put that there, refresh, 10 and 5. Now it's 42.5. Okay, so now what I would want to do is check with my calculator and make sure that 50 times 0.85 is what I'm getting in my program, so just that I can double check once I take off that 15%. Okay. All right, any questions on this one?
No questions.
Okay, sounds good. Let's look at the next one. We got 2 left. The length of a cable can be approximated with this formula. Okay, where L is the length of the cable, S is the distance that the cable must span, and D is the distance the cable will sag or dip. Write a defining table and a program that allows the user to enter the distance of a cable, or the distance a cable must span and the distance the cable will sag. The program must compute and output the length of the cable. Wow, okay. So let's make a new file. So we have a spot to put our defining table. I'm just going to say class exercise 8.html. Exclamation mark, tab. I'm going to close this. I think my computer like broke because I closed Outlook when this was like still up, and now this won't go away. That's kind of annoying. Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh well. All right, let's see here. Defining table. So we need a script tag to put our JavaScript code, and that includes our defining table. So we have an input, processing, and output. What is our output?
Length of the cable.
So right here, your program must compute and output the length of the cable. So we'll go ahead and copy this. Input. I'm seeing three variables, L, S, and D. So L is the length of the cable that we're going to output. S is the distance it must span, and D is the distance the cable will sag or dip. So we need S, which is the distance it will span, and we need D, which is the distance it will dip, sag. Okay. All right. And then processing. Kind of nice little algebra formula here. So as long as we just declare these as S and D, then we can just basically copy this formula. And all we have to do is just convert this to JavaScript. So I'm just going to write that right here. I'll say S plus, and let's see here. We have a fraction. So the fraction will always be numerator divided by denominator. So top divided by bottom. So I would want to put that into parentheses. So that happens first. But then the numerator has multiplication and an exponent. And so for the numerator here, I would also put that into parentheses of its own to make sure that all that multiplication happens first. So for the numerator, I'll say 8 times D times D. Okay, that'll effectively square D. Okay, I could use math.pow D to the power of 2. That would work just fine. But in my mind, I think D times D looks a little simpler. And then divided by denominator, all that will be, again, I'll put this in parentheses, is 3 times S. Okay, so we have this whole fraction in parentheses. Then I have the numerator in parentheses being divided by the denominator, which is also in parentheses. Once all this finishes up, we'll go ahead and add S on top. Okay. We good? Does that help?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and write our HTML. So we're going to say, please enter. I'm going to copy this guy right here. The distance the cable must span. And then our next one is Control-C, Control-V. Please enter the distance the cable will sag. At the end of each of these, we need a nice input with a unique ID. So here I'll say span. And here I'll say sag. Okay, so there's our inputs. And then we'll need a button to call our function. So onClick, calculate length, or calculate cable length needed. We'll say calculate for our button. And then we'll have a div, again, with an ID of output. Okay. Questions up to this point?
Everything looks simple, so no questions.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and start with our function name. So function, calculate cable length needed. And I just hit tab. Again, if you guys haven't heard me say that before, if I start typing this and it has this suggestion highlighted that I want, if I just hit tab, it'll complete that for me, which is really nice. And then in here, we'll have an input, processing, and output. So first things first, I'll say var span equals document dot get element by ID span dot value. Okay, this is a number, which, like we said in our last program, anytime I'm retrieving a number from the HTML, I will always say parse float. Control-C, Control-V, then I'll select this and hit Control-D. Control-D will select the next string that I have selected. And so now I'm just going to type in sag for both of those. Okay, so on line 16, we'll read from the span input and assign that value parsed into a number into the variable called span. And then we'll do the same thing on line 17 for sag. And that's it for our input. Next, output. So document dot get element by ID output dot inner HTML equals length, which we have not declared yet. If I run this, I'm going to copy the path. If I run this right now, type in a number, another number, and hit calculate. Oh, that's interesting. I thought it was going to give us a nice big error because of the length there. Oh, length might be a variable that's already declared in JavaScript. That's interesting. So I'm going to call this cable length, and I'm going to hit refresh. And now if I do this, you can see now we get this nice little error right here. It says cable length is not defined. That's really interesting. So always make sure you have these tools open so that you can see what's going on. But we do know that we hit this function because the error didn't show up until we pushed our button. We know that these two lines of code are fine because the error didn't show up until line 20. So I think we're good to this point. We just have to say var cable length to declare a variable, and we have to do some math. Now this right here, I'm just going to copy. We did all the work already. The only thing we have to change is we named our variables span and sag instead of S and D. So let's go back and look over here. So S is the distance the cable must span. So S is span and D is sag. So I'm going to click right here and click right here. Hold shift and hit my right arrow to select both of them. And I'm going to call this span, and I'll change both of those. And then the other way that I could select both is if I select this and hit Control D, it'll select the next of whatever I'm searching for. And I'll call this sag. Okay, so we're saying span plus, and then we have our nice fraction here, 8 times sag squared divided by 3 times span. And that should give us our cable length. Let's give it a shot. Now, ones like this are a little bit trickier because it's harder to test. You know, I've never really had to calculate cable length and sag and stuff. So we're going to get some number in here, and I would assume that this number won't be terribly greater than the initial span anyways. If it just sags a little bit, maybe it'll be like 30% higher, maybe less, probably less. I have no idea, but probably not double, you know. So please enter the distance that the cable must span. Let's say that it'll span 100 feet, and it will sag 20 feet. No, that's kind of extreme. It'll sag 10 feet. Calculate. See, look, that looks like a very logical number, okay? It sags 10 feet, and so it adds 2 feet onto the total length of cable that we need. That, I mean, if it had said 5, I would have said the same thing. But just looking at this, I'm like, okay, we probably have our formula right here because that is a very logical number, okay? So yeah, if we wanted to round this, again, we could. I could put a math.round right here. And I could also pass in another parameter, say like to 3 decimal points. Okay, so if I hit refresh over here, and I say 100 and 10. Oh, maybe I can't do that. Never mind. So we'll take that off. But we could round that to 103 if we wanted to. I forgot that to do it with decimals in JavaScript, you actually have to use a string. So we won't worry about doing that right now. The only other thing that I'd say we should add is right here. Let's type in an image attribute. And then for our source, let's say electrical power line sag. Let's see what we come up with. Ooh, look at that beautiful image. Ooh, these are nice. Okay, so I'm just gonna right click on this and open a new tab and right click on this, copy image address. That's the source. And then right here, I'll just paste it. Now, if I run this right now, the thing will be massive because that was a big file. You know, so you can see we got our image in here. Here's our program down here. So we're gonna add a little bit of style in here just to make it smaller and fit the page more. So I'm on the image tag or image attribute. I'm just gonna put style, a style attribute in here. And I'll say width is 500 pixels. Okay, this will automatically adjust the height since I'm not specifying the height. I can come back over here, hit refresh, and you see now I can actually see the whole program. All right, if I didn't want those to show up on the same line, that's an easy fix. All I have to do is just put a break right here for the rest of my code. And if I hit refresh, now this is all underneath our picture. Okay. All right, we should put another break. Let's see. There, that'll look even better. Okay, any questions on this one?
No.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let's look at our last one then. Close that. Okay, number 9. The size of a car tire in the United States is represented with 3 numbers like this: 205/60R15. The first number is the width of the tire in millimeters, so 205. Second number is the aspect ratio. The third number is the diameter in inches of the wheel that the tire fits. Write a defining table in a program that reads from the keyboard those 3 numbers for a tire and computes and outputs the volume of space inside that tire. The volume of space inside a tire can be approximated, wow, with that formula. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this program here. I'm going to right click on this, new file, class exercise number 9.html, exclamation mark, tab, and let's add a script tag for our defining table. So we have an input, processing, and output. Okay, I can close this and move this over. That's a good spot. All right, so what is our input? Looking at this formula, if I didn't read anything else, pi we can get from our JavaScript math object. We have W, A, and D. Okay, so W is the width of the tire in millimeters. I'm just going to copy that. A is the aspect ratio of the tire. And D is the diameter in inches. Okay, are we good up to this point?
Yeah.
Okay. Output. We are going to output and outputs the volume of space inside the tire. Okay. Okay, now let's do our formula. I like to do it here. Some people like do this verbally, and they'll write out the word pi times W. I kind of just prefer to do it very similar to how it'll actually be in JavaScript. So, but I don't know how to write that pi character. I wonder if I can copy this pi character. Look at that. That's awesome. Okay, so we have pi times W times W. All right, that's W squared. Again, we could say math.pow W to the power of 2. They're the same thing. We'll do it this time. Okay, so we have we have W squared times pi times A times, and then we have parentheses. Okay, we'll worry about those in a sec. We also have divided by 10 million. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I would put this whole thing into parentheses to ensure that everything in the numerator happens first before that division takes place. Where this division is happening at the very end, it doesn't really make a difference. If I wanted to put the denominator in parentheses, I could, but there's no other math taking place. And so this division will happen after everything in here. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we have pi times W squared times A times, and then we have more stuff in parentheses. So let's do this real quick. We'll say W times A plus 2540 times D. Now, what's wrong with this is order of operations. Okay, if I do this right now, then W times A will happen, and then D times 2540 will happen. And then we'll add those together. So instead, what we have to do is we have to put W and A inside of parentheses to make sure that that happens first. And then, let's see here. I guess we can test it. We have a nice little test case that we can use here. Because looking at this formula, I'm trying to think. I'm wondering if this 25 would get added onto this first and then be multiplied by D, or if D would get multiplied by this and then add that onto W and A. So let's go ahead and for now, let's act like this has to happen first. So we're going to add more parentheses right there, and then we'll multiply it by D afterwards. No, because in algebra, D would happen first. So we're going to undo that. Sorry, guys. And we'll just put parentheses right there. Now, do we have to have those there? No, because multiplication will automatically happen before addition. But this helps me see that explicitly this will take place first. Because looking at this algebra over here, I'm like, wait, which one's going to happen first? And so I tend to use lots of parentheses to be like, no, this is going to happen first no matter what you want to do. And then we'll add those together. Okay, so let's review this. We have pi times W squared times A, nice and easy. And then times, in parentheses, we have W times A plus 2540 times D. Then that whole thing, once that parenthesis finishes up this entire thing, then we'll divide it by 10 million. Okay, and that will give us the volume in cubic centimeters. Okay, that's actually good to know. Volume of the space of tire in cubic centimeters. All right, let me open this up a little bit. So that's our finding table. Let's go ahead and do the HTML. So we'll say, please enter the, I'm actually going to copy that 3 times. And then I'm going to copy all of these and paste. Okay, so please enter all of these things, and then we'll go ahead and make an input for each, and then an ID for each. Whoops.
You put D twice.
So for this one, we'll just say width, and for this one, we'll say aspect ratio, and for this one, we'll put diameter. We could make these anything that we want. Okay, so we have our inputs there. We should probably add some colons.
You put D twice.
Okay, and then we're going to need a button. On click, calculate volume, and then we just need a div with an ID for us to use. Questions up to this point?
Nope.
All right, so let's go ahead and write our function. If I wanted to save this real quick, just to look at it, see what it looks like, make sure it looks good, I could just copy our path and then paste it here. And I don't really like the way that looks. So maybe I would just put a breakpoint or a line break at the end of each of those lines. That looks a little bit nicer to me. And if I looked at their stuff, that's what they did as well. They put a line break on each one. Okay, ooh, and they put centimeters cubed right there. I don't know how they put that little 3 there. So we'll worry about that later. So function, calculate volume. And then we'll have to do our input, our processing, and our output. So for our input, we have document.getElementById, width.value. Okay, I'm going to copy that a couple of times. We'll also have aspect ratio, and we'll have diameter. Now, this will retrieve those values for us, but now we have to do 2 more things with each one of these lines of code. We have to parse those values into numbers, and then we also have to assign them to variables. Let's see here. Oh, thank you. Okay, another hotkey, Control Alt down arrow will allow me to just like drag my cursor down, then I can just delete all my typos at once. Okay, so I'm gonna do that same thing, Control Alt down arrow for both of these and type in parse float and left arrow. Okay, so now all we have to do is just declare a variable for each one of those. And I'll go ahead and just copy these and say var, and I'll paste those. And then we have our width, aspect ratio, and diameter for our inputs. Okay, our output is going to be the volume in cubic centimeters. So I say document dot get element by ID output dot inner HTML equals, and we'll just say volume. Okay, if we look at their program, all they have is just a number shown up here, not like a string or anything or a message. So we'll just have a number show up for us too. Okay, now our processing, we can pretty much just copy this. And we'll just say var volume equals that. This won't work. So instead we just say math.pi times w squared times a. And I think, oh, except we don't have w and a declared, or d. So let's look back. I'm assuming w is width and a is aspect ratio. Yeah, and d is diameter. Okay, good. So let's copy width. And each time I see a w, backspace and paste for width. Each time I see an a, backspace and paste. And then each time I see that d variable, I'll put that in there. All right. Well, let's give it a shot. I'm going to drag this over here just so we can compare it with this number here. So I'm going to say 205. Well, let me refresh just to make sure that we have everything in here. I'm going to open up my developer tools, make sure I don't have any errors. I don't, so I'm going to close that for a sec. 205, aspect ratio is 60, and diameter is 15 inches. Calculate. Wow, that was awesome. So the only thing different that we did is we haven't rounded it. Okay, it looks like they rounded theirs to 1 decimal, but that number is 39,924.5. So all we have to do is round it. So let's look in our chapter to see if we can find a good example of rounding. So that's square root, math.round, which we did. Let's see here. It looked like they were rounding right here. So round to decimal places. Right, fractional numbers to fixed number, fixed decimal point. Lines 27 through 29 of the next example use math.power and math.round functions to round the value in the variable named dist to 2 decimal places. Okay, so 27 and 29, they declare digits as 2. And they use digits right here. Interesting. So math.pow, they're saying 10 squared. So multiplier will be 100. And then dist here is going to be, they're going to round whatever dist was times 100. They're going to round it and then divide it by 100. Well, that's awful. So that's one way that you could round this. Another way that you can round it. So check this out. JavaScript round, wow, to 2 decimal places. Okay, 2 fixed. Okay, now like I said, 2 fixed will actually return a string. And you can see that if we look right here, here's the way it looks if we have a number. So if I had like volume, I could say volume dot 2 fixed, and then X will be however many decimals I want it to be. So right here we have a number, say number dot 2 fixed, and then pass in a 2 to say to 2 decimals. It will convert a number into a string. Okay, so if I wanted to do math with this afterwards, I wouldn't be able to. Where I am using this to output a nice value to a user, I don't care that it's a string because they're never going to know whether it's a string or a number data type. Okay, if I was going to do more math with it, let me show you what I would do. So right here I have my volume. Okay, that's my number. I'm going to say volume dot to fixed to 2 decimal places. Is that what they had? What did they have? They had 1. Okay, so we'll say 1 decimal point. Let's see if that works. Oh, I lost my file. Copy path, come over here and paste. And oh, it's because I separated it. There it is. All right, I'll refresh that. 205, 60, 15. Okay, so we get the exact same value. You would never know that it's a string data type. Doesn't really matter. But if I wanted to do math with it, I could not now. Okay, so notice right here, I'm doing it where I'm actually going to output it to the inner HTML of the output div. Okay, this is like the end of my program. I didn't put the to fixed right here, although I could. If I put this whole thing into parentheses, and I said dot to fixed 1, then it would do it. And that would work out great. Okay, but I don't want to round it here, because if I ever wanted to do anything else with this volume, I would want an accurate number. And this is not as accurate as it was before we rounded it. Now, real quick, let's just go like this. We'll say var x equals volume dot to fixed of 2. And then we'll say var y equals parse float of x. All right, and we're going to look at what both of these give us in the developer tools. So let me open this up nice and big, hit F12. Then go to sources, and I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. Okay, I'm going to hit calculate. Okay, so we have volume right there, our nice big unrounded number. And then we have volume.toFixed. It shows toFixed as a function. We're passing in a 2 there. And then we get, where's x? Oh, interesting. Huh. Interesting. So I wonder if it just changed volume. Let's do a little test here. So I have var volume equals 50 point some decimal. Okay. Now I'm just using the console in here. I could do any type of JavaScript that I want here. And if I just say volume dot to fixed 3 decimal points, what I want to see, so this is what it returned. I want to see if this also changed my volume variable. Okay, and it didn't. That's interesting that it returned that and then didn't assign it to x. So if I say var x equals volume dot to fixed 3, and then x, yeah. So this time it assigned 50.424 in a string to x. But then if I wanted to turn that back into a number to do math with, then I could just say var y equals parse float of x. And that will convert that string back into a number, just like we do anytime we get an input. Okay. So toFixed is fantastic. It is specific to JavaScript. Okay. But I do not know of a programming language that will make you do something like this. This is awful. Okay. I mean, it's cool that you can do it like that, but that's really intense. So anyways, just be aware of that. But do you have any questions about this program that we just wrote?
No, I don't. Are you hearing me?
Can't hear you, Eliana.
You can? Okay. You can?
Is something wrong with my speaker? I'm not hearing you.
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me now?
Is your microphone working? Okay, well, thank you guys for your participation, and good luck as you guys study for your exam, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye, see you later.